Well, I don't like to crow over the dead. It's not right. One of the wonderful things about a country like this is that its minorities are so huge. Think of the Democratic Party as a minority. You'll see what I mean. There are so many misfits, even, that all kinds of groups of misfits can be constituted, or they have high visibility. Let's put it that way. So there's no problem at all in getting other strange people to read your strange paper. It depends on what you mean by a following. If you mean, do we have the readership of Time magazine, the answer is obviously no. Or the New York Times. But the answer is no there, but then there's the relief that comes over you at the knowledge that you have nothing in common with the readers of
Time magazine. I would think there are plenty of readers left. Basically, what Saul saying is absolutely correct. There are millions or hundreds of thousands of readers out there who are simply unsatisfied with what they get. After all, there are all sorts of far more peculiar things than our anthology, which attract a substantial number of readers for far more particular tastes.
Paying readers, by the way. Yeah. I mean, if it's erotica, they will pay happily.
Yeah. And there are poetry readers. That's more esoteric than what we put out. We put out the bread and potatoes of literature, which is prose. But there's something for everybody in America, and that's one of its great gifts. And Saul is dead right on that.
How did this anthology begin? Beginning with The Noble Savage.
Shall I do the historical bit?
Yeah, why not?
Well, this anthology came about because Saul has been prodding for years, saying that The Noble Savage and our other magazines published a bunch of very good texts, and therefore this should be looked at and considered and reread, since some of it is unavailable, or a lot of it is unavailable.
You must have a private list of important writers who've got their start with us.
Oh, yes. I mean, from everybody from Tom Pynchon to Robert Coover and so on, all sorts of, guys who became famous after, not because they published with us, but they became famous afterwards, and we picked up their old stories. I recall admiring Ted Hoagland published his first story in our collection and so on. So, it provides an outlet for the young, and also that great thing we do in the anthology, which is to save the old from oblivion. Victor Hugo, Samuel Butler, John Aubrey, all these people nobody reads appear in the same pages with the freshest young writers. And again, even in the Republic of Letters, we continue to publish brand new writers whose first stories appear. We've done 2 in the last 2 issues.
Is there anything about this anthology that's indigenously American?
Well, we have the technical means, and we have the pennies that you need to ante up, and it's relatively cheap and easy to do, and with all of this new technology of reproduction, it just begs to be used. So we use it.
And on the indigenous side, Saul has always been, and perhaps even more than I, partisan to making it an American-based thing for American writers. I tend to be more cosmopolitan, rootless, deracinated, and generally...
Cosmopolitan going back about 10 centuries.
Yeah. So, there's a slight difference between us there. Saul has always insisted very much on the American side. And I think, when you read the anthology through, what strikes me about it is its enormous consistency of style. That is, in the sense we both have, that a writer has a voice, and that voice is generally American in a very specific way. It's free, it's easy, it's relaxed, it is idiomatic, it is... à la page, as we say, it's right up to date in that sense. yet it's classical at the same time.
Going back to the beginning, what happened at the Algonquin?
Can you remember what happened at the Algonquin?
I don't think I was sober enough for.
Saul and I were at Bard, and we decided we ought to have a magazine. We called a bunch of people together, and we chose that peculiar venue for it, and everybody sort of, as I recall the meeting, and I think it was an extremely good lunch.
Yes.
And we were fairly pissed by the end of it, I do think. But anyway, the general tenor of the meeting was that this is an impossible project. What the hell are you doing? Why should you do such a thing? You're both writers. You shouldn't spend your time. Above all, you, Saul, who are a big writer, shouldn't be wasting your time on this sort of thing. We persisted, and they all came around in the end and did very handsomely by us, though some declined.
Some were very eager. I mean, Arthur Miller was very keen
Yeah,
on it.
very keen. Arthur was very keen, and Sid Perlman was very good.
That's S.J. Perlman.
Yeah, Sid S.J., sorry. And Herbert Gold was very pro,
Yeah.
as I recall. It was a fun meeting. But I mean, we did it for obvious reasons of literary antecedents. I mean, you know, at the Algonquin. I forget who paid for that dinner.
I don't know. I didn't.
No, I think maybe Arthur Asher did.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
His first name is not Arthur.
No, that's right. What is it? Aaron Asher.
Aaron
Asher. That's it. Yeah.
Aaron Asher was an editor at the Viking Press and other big companies.
And Viking was both our publishers, and so it worked out very nicely. It was sort of in-house, and Aaron was tremendously useful. Aaron was our sort of basic reader as well.
And so was that agent. What's her name?
Candida Donadio.
Donadio.
Yeah.
She was a woman who specialized in writers of this sort.
Yeah, she had been a telephonist at my first literary agency, and when she left, I left. I was her third client. Her first two, however, were Philip Roth and Joe Heller. So I was a big bummer after that lot. There was, yeah.
Were there any writers either then or now that have resisted collaborating with you or contributing?
They didn't have to resist. After all, we didn't pull a sack over their heads and whisper into their ears, "You are going to Spanish Morocco to be a slave."
There were some, particularly with Anon, there were some who didn't want to be anonymous. That's the only time I ever ran into any difficulty whatever. No, basically our writers either sent their stuff in or we twisted their arms a bit. You know, obviously some people are, how do you get stuff out of them? That's still the case.
Have you made any enemies either by publishing or not publishing a piece?
I certainly have. I have an old high school chum who goes around Chicago to this day saying what a creep I am and so on. It's bound to happen.
You don't make friends by turning down anything at any time, okay? You just don't make a friend that way. You may make a friend by publishing, which is another matter altogether, but enmity is the peculiarity of this anthology, I think, is the fundamental.
Opposition is true friendship, says William Blake.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I always look for something from Blake to strengthen me on life's path.
The basic thing about this anthology is that it is enormously Catholic, and Saul and I are both Catholic readers. I mean, Catholic in the sense that we don't belong to any school. We take whatever comes along that's good and has a voice and so on. So that's very different from the usual anthology, which is sort of like anthology of Trotskyite writing or, advanced Catholic writers or New Jersey Jewish writers or whatever, or women writers. We just take anything that comes along, and so we're very open. So we don't make as many enemies as others do. Try the Partisan Review in the early days.
That's right.
Early in Ravelstein, Chick says it's no small matter to become rich and famous by saying exactly what you think, to say it in your own words without compromise.
You laugh at your own jokes.
For 50 years, both of you have managed to do this. What accounts for this freedom?
Well, the freedom is hereditary. It comes with a turf. It comes with literature. This is what people have always. This is how people have always learned to write interestingly by by yielding to their more conspicuous feelings and convictions.
Yeah, that's right. I'll stand by that.
At this point, what fuels your desire to write? Because you both still write pretty actively.
Well, this is pour encourager les autres. It is.
Did you understand that, Elon?
Oui, oui.
Oui, oui. No, absolutely. This is certainly this magazine. It was less so with The Noble Savage and
Yeah.
on, though it began that way. But this magazine, we're both, writers of a certain standing. Mr. Bellow of a very high, illustrious standing. I have a lesser standing. But we also owe a debt to a great number of people, to literature in general, to writing, to style. And it seemed to us that most magazines are pretty bloody ungenerous. And we just decided when we do it, we'd put up our own money, which would make us entirely free. So we didn't have to go, yucking after foundations or take money from universities or advertisers or anything else. We'd just do something for, the general benefit. And I think that's the way it's worked out.
So by editing your own journal, you've been given the freedom to write what you like.
No, I don't think it has. The two are quite separate tracks, aren't they? So,
That's right.
Yeah,
You write what you like. You write what you're going to write anyhow.
Yeah. In fact, there's a kind of reluctance, in a way, I suspect, to I think almost all editors, and we in particular, though we feel we ought to publish in a magazine, there's generally a reluctance to publish yourself in your own magazine because that seems like self-aggrandizement. However, there are two reasons why we do. First, readers of any magazine that we've had, I think, are entitled to know what the editor's standards are. And the editor's standards are best revealed by the way the editor writes. So he says, this is what I do. If you can do as well, join us. And the other reason is that basically the writing act is totally separate from this, and you wouldn't really want to appear too much or too often, because it's a separate track in your mind.
It isn't as though we would have trouble being published wherever we liked. It's just that we feel that there are tendencies that are neglected and which deserve support. And you want to see them, and you want to publicize them, and you want other writers to see them. Some of the interests represented by the avant-garde, what we used to call the avant-garde magazines, they're not avant-garde anymore. In a magazine like the Partisan Review is no longer avant-garde, or the Hudson Review, which was much more limited in its appeal to conservatives and reactionaries, say. They have no problem in placing themselves either in magazines, but they like to do it because they feel that these are points of view that should be publicly represented and encouraged.
I think something that also ought to be said about here is that most writers of a fairly large spirit, I don't mean mean-spirited writers, and there are plenty of those, are actually very generous. And there's a kind of generosity that comes, obviously in Saul's case, in publishing the major part of his work in the Republic of Letters, bits and pieces here and there, and I too, in a lesser way. It's an act of saying, well, we do this, and we'd like you to see it, and it's the impulse behind the magazines has always been extremely generous. And in the same way as you dig into your own pocket to make it, it's not a registered charity. We don't get big write-offs for it or anything, but it seems a generous thing to do in what is actually a fairly mean-spirited profession. I think that's a fair characterization.
I think it is fair. Yeah. I sometimes put it to myself in a shorter way, as simply saying, this is democracy at work.
Yeah. You ought to say, I think it is relevant to say what Philip said to you about, you oughtn't to be doing this, which I think when Rolf said that to you,
Who?
Philip Roth said that.
Oh yes, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, I mean, that's another quite selfish point.
He
of
thinks
view.
I should be chasing girls like him.
I don't notice that it stopped either of us, Saul.
Stop? No, but slow down a little bit.
Slow down, yes.
Some people say girls in rock and roll, but I think it should be girls in music.
Okay, we can do that one too.
Over the years, the two of you have associated with Ralph Ellison, John Berryman, Arthur Miller, Sid Perlman. There doesn't seem to be a comparable community of writers today. I mean, unless you include the rock band with Amy Tan and Dave Barry. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know why that is. I think that we fraternize more with other writers 2 or 3 decades ago, and now it doesn't happen so very much. There is not this same fraternal, in the trade feeling.
Probably a lot of these, a lot of magazines do start locally, all right? There have been very famous Chicago magazines, less famous New York magazines, LA magazines, Seattle magazines, so on. So partly that. Magazines have turned a lot to the academy for their basic sustenance, so that's another thing that brings writers together. But the more general community of writers has been fractured for at least 40 years now. Fractured by politics, by distance, and largely by commerce. Because to put somebody else up is to put yourself down, and so on. I mean, it's all a giant balancing act, and this seems to me reprehensible, and I'm pretty sure Saul feels the same way about it. One misses it. One misses a great deal. Things like the lunch at Algonquin, peculiar though it may be, it brought together a lot of people who were of a like mind. And the world is full of people of a like mind. The question is how you discover them, how you know them, and how you ever get them to meet someplace.
That's right.
That's very difficult.
Did you have
That's an important point. It is the, you say birds of a feather flock together, produce me a bird or even show me a feather. So we rise to the challenge, right?
Yes. Did you have a greater respect for your peers than perhaps today's writers?
I would say a fraternal feeling, or I don't know very much about today's writers. Like everybody else, I read about them.
You don't read them?
I read. I'm democratic. I'll read anybody who's good.
Yeah, that's right. Part of the game that has gone on between us that leads to magazines and in fact shows up in the anthology is very much a matter of Saul and I exchanging a letter, a postcard, a telephone call, say, have you read? And that's part of a big game between us. And the enthusiasm with which we read works that are recommended, each of us, by the other. You know, so Saul will say, have you read so-and-so? And I'll say, no, who is he? And he say, well, you must read it. And that's part of that old community. And that's broken down. And there are no mechanisms for bringing it back to life because, the ego today is inflated beyond the Graf Zeppelin size. I mean, most of these writers go around just for themselves and in the sense of their own value as themselves, not as part of a thing called literature in which they're all participating, which we're all participating.
Who have you been impressed by of current writers?
The people we publish.
So James,
obviously.
James Wood.
Well, James Wood, I think, is an exceptional critic. I think he is equivalent at his age to what Edmund Wilson was at his age, and that's a very large stake. And in an era where we have almost no critics of universal appeal who write with the kind of intelligence and breadth of culture that Wood writes with, certainly that's true.
I don't think that Wilson was Wilson was wonderful on Stendhal or Flaubert.
He wasn't as good on contemporary
No,
stuff.
he wasn't.
No, Wood is very, very sharp on picking up what's going on and doing, extraordinarily thorough readings. I mean, he's really quite exceptional young man. I mean, he's in his bloody mid-30s, It's enough to drive either of us furious.
That's right.
I can't stand the idea of somebody 35 being that bright. But there are a lot of young writers that we've put in whom we greatly like. I mean, you know, we pick them up, they arrive in the mail. You pick it up, and almost immediately, generally with a writer who eventually gets published with us, you see that they're good. It's just as simple as that. It just comes off the page.
Does being anthologized, in effect, stave off death?
Does what?
Being anthologized stave off death.
Well, nothing really staves it off, you know. It's
Coming your way, too. But not tomorrow.
Good. Does
I know what you're trying to ask there, Elon, and perhaps I'll make it a little bit easier by saying, is it a form of immortality? No, being anthology is not, certainly not in this anthology, a form of immortality. This isn't the Norton Anthology of English Prose. This is the collective work of two guys who've known each other and worked together for 50 years advancing the cause of literature, and that's a very specific sort of focus, obviously.
We had our predecessors, you know. Their names would not be familiar to you, but I could name some.
Sure.
Alexander Woolcott, for instance, he used to make these wonderful collections of contemporary writing, and he was one of the handful who did that. He did it very well. He came up with some marvelous things.
Even some people who are greatly decried today, like Mr. Fadiman, did not a bad job sometimes.
Right.
And, you know, it's much more common in Europe than it is in America, this sort of thing. That is to say, there are far more of these sort of collections. But this one's very special because this one shows its sort of inner dynamic between two very old friends working on one thing. So this is unusual. I know no anthology that includes 4 magazines specifically as that. And it's meant to be a sort of a demonstration of the kind of taste that we have.
Do you write anything as a legacy to your children?
No, not consciously. I mean, I've been teaching them ever since they could understand. And I think they feel that they've been handled a little too much.
Well, Saul's oldest son is, what is he, 60 now, Gregory?
Yes, he's in his late 50s.
My oldest is a mere 44, okay? So, no, you don't write as a legacy. Rather the contrary, I suspect. You often write creating great difficulties for your children because they don't understand you and they don't understand the difference between life and fiction very often. So that when you write fiction, they see it as real. They see that, you know, if you talk about something that looks vaguely like their mother, it must be their mother, and therefore you're insulting them. Anyway, writers are bloody difficult and selfish people to have as fathers. I wouldn't want to be the son of a writer, and I'm glad none of my children have chosen to follow directly in my path, and I think probably you are too, because then they would get their bloody revenge, wouldn't they?
My father wrote contracts. He had no sympathy with anything else you might write.
What problems have you had with, you know, art imitating life and people being perhaps unhappy with what you've written?
Saul has written far more contentious things than I have on that score, so he should talk about it, but then my next book is more contentious than any, so obviously, if you tell the truth, which is the only point that writers ever have to make, is examining their version of the truth, you're going to upset some people along the way. There's no doubt about this. And there's no way around it either. Either you suppress the truth. If you go back to a writer like Silone, who worked over his own life quite remarkably, and you see the very painful truthfulness of that, and then Silone gets attacked for concealing the fact that at a certain point he took money from the fascist regime. But you know that if it came up and it had become public in his lifetime, he would have faced it. He would have said, yes, I did. These were the circumstances. Of course, it's very easy to knock people down once they're dead. And of course, the whole métier of the late 20th century, the profession of the late 20th century, is to tear down anybody who's any good. And that's what the various book reviews around the country do regularly, and the New York Review. I will go into this. I think I'll pass that one by right before I get angry.
Did you have any problems with Revelstein?
Did I have problems? I have problems with everything that I write.
There's always somebody unhappy.
What?
There's always somebody unhappy with you.
That's right.
Well, fortunately, there's always somebody happy, too, okay? I mean, if Alan were around to read Ravelstein, he would have loved it. It's as simple as that. And, you know, it takes a certain largesse. The Charterhouse, I'm sorry, The Red and the Black is almost the perfect example of that. The number of people who trolled around the French salons say, you know, you are exactly that sort of person. You know, he must have been writing about you. Obviously, people feel ill at ease, and I'm sure there were plenty of people in Shakespeare's day who felt they were being maligned in the form of Shylock, King Lear, Macbeth, etc. I mean, obviously. You know, literature does touch raw
Yeah,
nerves.
but in those days, the theater was a low form of
Yeah, that's true.
entertainment, and the pit was full of apprentices. And
Now the apprentices are all running the literary magazines. Yeah.
Is there anything that you feel sets both of you apart as literary editors from others?
You mean, do we differ from each other?
No, from people in the past like Alexander Wolcott.
I don't know about Saul, but I mean, I think we're in a line, in an absolutely direct line with endless editors going back to Sainte-Beuve and before. I mean, ever since magazines came into being, generally they've been writers, more often critics than writers of fiction.
well, there was H.L. Mencken
H.L. Mencken, a remarkable editor indeed. And these are people
of the
that-
American Mercury.
We feel all
in
sorts
the
of
old days.
sympathy for these people, I would think,
Who-
and I think
He picked a lot of winners. I mean, he published a great many writers by now in the Pantheon who were totally unknown when in their youth, and he picked them. He was very good.
well, so did the first Vanity Fair. So did, to be fair, so did the New Yorker, you know, at various times. Magazines have their apogees. The thing you have to understand about magazines, and I think the public never understands, is they must be considered as ephemera. You know, they're like mayflies. They come, they live 37 days, and then they go, and they should go. A magazine that lasts for 50 years, like, you know, like the Nouvelle Revue Française or something, by definition is going to lose out,
Yeah.
because it's no longer in tune.
I had occasion one day to talk to John Berryman about them, and he said, "Oh, they were a very slick pair." What do you mean? Well, he said, I was after Agee, whom I knew well, to get me a job at the back of the book, that is to say, films, theater, religion, education, so on, books. And I used to play poker with him. I did too. I was part of that gang in the village. We were always after Agee to get us a job at Time Life. And finally, he did give John Berryman a job. Occasionally, he would do that. But it was preconcerted with Whittaker Chambers that you would be hired in the morning and fired by Chambers in the afternoon, because Chambers had the power to vet all of these new people. So, and it happened to me too. I got a job. I was in heaven. I was going to review movies for Time magazine. And in the afternoon, I was called in by Whittaker Chambers. I think I told that story, and fired.
Does James Wood live in this country?
Yeah, he's in Washington currently, but he'll be...
He's at the New Republic.
Yeah.
They brought him here from England to be on the staff.
Is that someone that...
He'll be here next Saturday, because he's dining with us next Saturday.
What's the date next Saturday, by the way? The 23rd or something?
21, I think. Pinsky.
Yes, and what's his name? Well, never mind naming names.
Never mind all the tattle, the gossip that makes life go round.
That's right.
Oh, you?
Save that one.